Okay, welcome to the Rewilding Academy. Today we are talking about spring. It feels very much like spring in Texas. Not sure where you are in the world, and some of you are also here. So enjoying that. Whether or not, though, it feels like it's coming. And so now is the time of year where we actually want to start transitioning our bodies into springtime season. Our DNA, our bodies, our metabolism, the way our brains function, our nervous systems, like everything adapts to the seasons. So whether or not we like to believe it or not, in our modern world, we've kind of lost touch of that. Obviously, many of us live in buildings. We're not sensitive to the light. We don't live outside. We don't feel the temperature. We don't grow our own food. We're not really noticing as much the cycles in nature as we used to when we lived more in this environment. However, we still are creatures of nature. And we are humans on this earth, so we adapt seasonally. And so we kind of have to look to our intuition to guide us in this process. And also we look more to like indigenous cultures, traditional cultures, and just more traditional forms of medicine, because they often honor this knowing. And so I often talk a lot about the indigenous medicine wheel and like traditional Chinese medicine, just because that's kind of what I know more about, what I'm trained in. So that's the reference I look at it. And it also genetics, which I think is super cool. Now that we are starting to be able to study epigenetics, we can start to see how these environmental shifts actually trigger our DNA to shift. Kind of unrelated, but there's a bunch of studies that they did. I don't even know when, but I remember learning this in university way back in the day in evolutionary neuroscience or something. But they found out that there's light receptors in the back of our knees, like human knees. And so we will entrain to light, yes, like with our brains and our pineal gland, and like our eyes obviously are entraining to light, but also in the back of our knees. So just kind of showing that there are a lot of things that we don't actually know that are going on around us. So our bodies and our triggers, our environment, they're always interacting with each other, the mitochondria, the energy, the light receptors in our brains, but also in our knees, and all this other stuff we don't know about. So just like keeping that in mind as we start to move through these knowings. Today, we're specifically mostly going to talk about allergies and histamine. It's going to be more of like a kind of physical medicine chat. I'm going to bring in obviously some of these teachings. And then tomorrow, same time, same place, we're going to have another lecture, and I'm going to talk more about some of the actual practical things that we can do. So today we'll talk more about the background. Okay, so let me figure out how to share my screen. I feel like I should have done this before. Okay. Can you see that, Ariane? Can you give me a thumbs up if you can see that, just because I can see your screen? Okay, beautiful. Thank you so much. Okay. So now I'm trying to figure out if there's a way to open the chat while this is happening. I don't know if I can figure it out. Okay, I'm just gonna leave it. I can see some of your faces and, oh wait, chat. Okay, I can see it now, great. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so we're going to talk about the foundations of allergy season in spring. Like I was talking about, our DNA is changing, and now we're starting to move into spring. The days are starting to get longer, the temperatures are starting to get warmer, and we are starting to change. And so in Chinese medicine, this is the season of, or like spring and summer are the season of yang energy. So like sun energy, masculine energy, just like brightness and like doing things, being outside, growth, expansion. Whereas yin, as you might know, is more of a winter, fall, kind of a dark, moody, feminine, nourishing kind of energy. So In Chinese medicine, now is the time when we're sort of coming out of that yin season, out of winter, out of hibernation, and moving into spring season. So with spring, again, as we also see this mimicking in nature, this is the time of growth, of expansion, of birth. Again, the sun's getting brighter, or the temperature's getting warmer, the sun's days are getting longer, all of these things are going on. So, what does that actually mean for what we're doing and what we're talking about today? A lot of us here, we struggle with allergies and the immune system. So this is one of the things that, or the side effects that happens to humans mostly in spring, just because of the pollen index, and in our modern world, because we are just becoming a lot more sensitive. So partly because there's a lot more chemicals, there's a lot more crap out there that's triggering us. We're becoming more sensitive over time. Our detox pathways aren't working as well. I could go on and on and on about why we're triggered, more sensitive nowadays, but we are. And so this translates to, at the end of the day, our bucket getting fuller and us being less able to handle stuff as it comes up, and then just more stuff coming up. So I kind of specialize in skin and eczema and allergies. That's my story personally. I grew up with eczema. I didn't have asthma, but I had a lot of environmental allergies, a lot of food sensitivities. I'm anaphylactic to nuts. I was always that allergic child that you could never bring peanut butter and stuff because of me. You're welcome. But, that's just a product of, again, there's a whole bunch of reasons why. But I'm more atopic. And so some of you you might not be that extreme. You might not have eczema, you might not have allergies, you might not have asthma, or you might have all of the above. But all of these conditions are centered around something called an atopic immune system, or an atopic trigger. So what that means is that your immune system is primed to be a little bit more sensitized to triggers. So it's more watchful. Right? It's going to react to something that it thinks is an invader, or a problem like a food that it actually might not be in real, and for someone else. So this is actually not a terrible thing. We want to have our immune system in balance. And obviously our immune system is so complex. It's much more complex than just saying like this balance is out, but just for simplicity's sake, we want to have more of a balance between the atopic conditions and what's called the Th1 thing, the Th1 balance. So, often when we see conditions of people who are more atopic, there are things like allergies, asthma, eczema, some types of autoimmune like parasites, this kinds of things. But there also seem to, and this is very still correlational, have less incidences of things like cancer, because our bodies are more able to target things that are not self and get rid of them. But then autoimmune stuff is also on the spectrum. So, you can kind of start to see how we want to have a balance, and some of these conditions can actually let us know that our body and our immune system are off balance. And again, always using it more as kind of like, all right, let's get this stuff together. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about allergies and sensitivities. What's the difference? Because there is one. So you might hear like a gluten allergy, gluten sensitivity, stuff like that. You may have heard me talk about this before. We're going to talk about testing. How can we actually test what we're allergic to? We'll talk about histamine and antihistamines and if they actually work. We'll talk about some of the root causes and how to figure out your root causes. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about seasonal triggers specifically today, just because we are talking about spring and that's what's incoming. And then again, tomorrow, we're going to talk more about the practicalities of what we can actually do. So allergies and sensitivities, there is a difference. So if we think of the immune system, we have allergies, we have sensitivities. Both are activating the immune system, but in different branches. So the allergy system, the IgE is what it's called, is the immunoglobulin, or the molecule that's activating in the immune system. This is a more sort of serious reaction. It's more like intensive, it's more violent, it's hot, it's red. This is the type of reaction that's happening when you go outside and it's cedar fever or pollen season, and your face is all red and your eyes are tearing and you can't breathe properly. This is the system that is being activated. This is also the system that is activated if you're someone like me and you eat a peanut and your throat closes and you can't breathe and you pass out and die. That's also an IgE allergic reaction. So it's fast and serious. It's pretty obvious. Hives, itchy, red. It can, kind of vary on different severities. If you're dealing with like a hay fever, sneezy kind of allergy, IgE, it's not the same type of reaction as the peanut eating reaction, but it is the same sort of molecule that's being released, it's just targeting different things. That's an allergy. So a sensitivity is a little bit more complex, and kind of the word gets thrown around a lot more in our modern day. So sensitivity is more of like a gluten sensitivity or a dairy sensitivity or something like that. So this is mostly food related. So, often environmental stuff is an IgE allergy. Food stuff is usually not like, unless it's an allergy, or sorry, I'm wording that complicated. Sensitivities are mostly food stuff. Okay, so food sensitivities are slower. They're not as obvious as the allergies. They come on slowly. Sometimes it can take up to like 4 days for something you ate to show up in your body as a sensitivity. So this is why it's hard to tell sometimes what you're sensitive to and why they can cause so much complexity. Over time, they can end up causing something called leaky gut. So what that is essentially is when the immune system gets activated in the gut and the lining of the gut becomes more permeable. It's not holding things in as well. And now these immune molecules can get out of the gut, they can go throughout the body, and they can cause a little bit more insidious things. So this also is different in every person. For me, it shows up as eczema in my skin. Sometimes it might show up as like brain fog, as fatigue, as diarrhea, as constipation, as joint pain, as inflammation, as like just not feeling great. And it happens slowly. So again, it's kind of one of those situations. If you're, for example, sensitive to dairy, I'm just using that because it's the example in my mind, but if you're sensitive to dairy, you've been eating it for years, your brain fog's been getting worse and worse. But is it that? Is it just getting older? Is it stress? Is it just life? It's hard to tell. So it is, and food sensitivities, I know, get thrown around a lot as a cause for a lot of things. And it's not always the be all and end all, but they do cause a lot of shit, to be honest with you. So it is important to pay attention to what they're doing and to be mindful of them and to eventually track them down. So you can actually have both of these systems being triggered at the same time. You can have allergies to stuff, you can have sensitivities to stuff, and a lot of us do. And so as we move into different seasons, whatever season you're most triggered by, we're going to talk about that later, but spring is the most common one. As we move into these different seasons, we start to see all of this stuff blow up and get worse and worse and worse. So today, what we want to figure out is like, what's a sensitivity for you? What are you allergic to? How do we tease out the difference? And if you have any questions, if anyone has questions or anything, just drop them in the chat. I will watch that and I will go over them later or now. But yeah, they're there. Okay, so testing. Obviously, the first thing in our modern world, we're going to say, great, how do I know what I have a food sensitivity? How do I know if it's an allergy? Is there a test for this? So kind of. There are options for testing, and we may have done some of them. Many of you, I know, have had allergy testing done. And I forgot to put a few on here. There is no gold standard, unfortunately, for like a test to say you are 100% allergic to something or not. Like there kind of is. So a blood test for IgE would be, I would say, the most accurate way to tell if you are allergic to something. However, it's still all kind of relative, and it fluctuates and it changes. And as some of you may know, flares and histamine levels go up and down, and this also does correlate with your body. So while these can give us a good idea, they can definitely give us a clue of like what you're allergic to, what you're sensitive to. We're still using it as a blueprint, and the real gold standard is just real life as always, and kind of testing it out and being really in tune with your body and being able to figure out if, yes, this is actually accurate for me, or yes, this is not accurate for me. So let's go through some of these tests. So allergy testing. So that's the IgE, asthma, anaphylaxis, hay fever, environmental stuff. How do you tell if you have those kinds of allergies? So I was saying one of them is a blood test. These are not done often. So an IgE allergy blood test is only done by an allergist, like a medical doctor allergist usually. I mean, I've run them before when I was in BC, so I can, but they are quite expensive. And they have to do like tests every single food or whatever separately. So that's why they're super expensive. And so if you're like, I don't know what I'm allergic to, let's test all of these things, it's not really the best way to go. It's more like, okay, I have narrowed it down to a few things. I'm very seriously allergic. Let's figure it out. We need to figure it out. That's when we'll use an IgE blood test. The first form of testing for allergies is the IgE prick test. So you can see that picture there. Some of you may have had these before. Usually they'll do them on your forearm or on your back as kids or as adults, whatever, but that's quite unpleasant if you've ever had one. They take a little needle and they're pricking the skin. And what they're doing is, again, it's a relative test. So they're not comparing it to like a global sample. They're comparing it to yourself. So as you do that, you'll notice they'll do one check mark or one plus sign, one negative sign. These are the controls. The positive control is pure histamine. So you're going to obviously react to that. And that's like the example, the tone of like, okay, this is the most your body is going to react to something is with the positive control. And then they'll go down these pricks and they'll put samples of different allergens, foods, whatever, and they'll compare that to the pure positive histamine to see how big the welt gets. And so they're kind of like, oh, like that peanut welt is, the biggest, it's almost as big as the pure histamine welt. So obviously that you're very allergic to peanuts because your body's reacting to it as it would with pure histamine. Whereas like the egg welt is barely big at all. So your body's not reacting to it. So it's fine. So that's kind of how the prick tests work. Now you can start to see how like it's up to interpretation. Also time. Sometimes it takes a lot longer for like an allergy to get bigger. It takes hours. You're not sitting at the doctor for hours. So that's not always accurate. Yeah, like it depends on, a lot of you might have, if you're going through, you've had blood tests for like total IgE, if you're super sensitive, that's off the charts, then everything is going to be high. So again, it's kind of like, it'll give us an idea. We can kind of see like you're allergic to peanuts and almonds. I'm using myself, but we're not allergic to like fish and whatever. We can kind of see based on the welts. But again, we want to test it, but we don't really want to test it. If it's saying you're super allergic to peanuts and you're going to die, like you're not really going to test that. So it's again, just kind of being aware and knowing. Okay. So sensitivities. Sensitivities are the IgE, the leaky gut, the food stuff that's kind of triggering you very slowly. These are a little bit harder to identify. So again, this realm of stuff, the food sensitivities, isn't really talked about at all in the Western world. Okay, so this is more of like a naturopathic, functional, alternative medicine kind of thing, is the food sensitivities. And again, it's like a lot of them tend to like latch onto it. So food sensitivity testing, again, a lot of you might have gone to see a naturopathic doctor or a functional medicine doctor and been immediately told you needed to have food sensitivity testing because you have eczema. And yes and no. So with eczema, whatever you call it, when I was in Canada, I called it eczema. And then in the States, everyone calls it eczema. So now I'm like, I don't know, I kind of switch back and forth, but you know what I'm talking about. So with that, the first route that we are taught to go through or go for is the food sensitivities and the gut. So a lot of the time it's like, all right, let's do a food sensitivity test immediately off the bat. And some of the time, if we're really allergic, if we're really inflamed, we come back with a test that's all red and everything is red and all the foods are red. And we're told, you're actually sensitive to everything, just like cut out everything or a lot of things. And the reason for that is not necessarily because we are actually sensitive to everything at the time, or you're sensitive to everything at the time. It's kind of like a false picture because potentially you've been eating, say, for example, like one or two things that you're sensitive to for a long time. You've now caused your gut to become leaky. Now that it's not as it's leaky, other things are getting through and they're triggering that test. So it's like saying that, yeah, you're sensitive to everything right now because your gut's just inflamed and it's kind of a mess down there, versus an actually like when you would want to do a food sensitivity test, ideally is when everything is good and you're not experiencing many symptoms and your gut lining is good, because it's going to give you a true picture. But that's not really when anyone is going to be, doing a test like that. So they have their merits. I will use a food sensitivity test. I don't often use, don't really use them in TSW at all. I never use them in TSW unless it's at the very, very, very end. And this is more of a picture of when I'll use it, is when it's someone who has like an eczema picture and they don't know what it is, and we don't know what it is. Like, I don't know, like we've kind of done more of the obvious trigger things because it is usually like a more obvious thing. The common 8 food allergens, which we'll talk about later, is there's a reason for that. But sometimes it's not. Sometimes it is a weird thing that's being triggered and it's like just a random food. And that's when I will use them. So, they have their merit. They're also kind of fun, I mean, if you have like a couple $100 to spend on some random test, that's kind of that. So there's also the Vega test. So some of you may have heard of this before. This is more of like a naturopathic kind of woo-woo thing, but it's when you go in and you hold the electrode thing and they have the vials of food or vials or whatever. And it's more of like an energetic test, and they'll tell you like you're allergic to this and this and this based on how the electrical current is running through your body. Again, currently not considered scientific. I think it's very accurate. Again, bit woo-woo, bit quantum physics-y. But now as we start to understand the frequencies and the body resistance and the biofeedback and all that kind of stuff, I think we will actually start to see that become more of a way to first diagnose and also treat allergies with frequency medicine. I think that's so cool. But as of now, it's still considered old school and a bit woo-woo. But you might have had that done at a doctor's office. So again, that's just what that is. Elimination diet. So that is, I guess, the gold standard, or what we will do now is the best way, is just real life, just to remove the things. The standard elimination diet is more of the like remove the 8 common food allergens, the soy, the dairy, the fish, the whatever. We'll talk about that later, and then bring them back and then see what you're triggered by. And then this is kind of also what we do when you do a food sensitivity test. So you do an IgG test. We're going to do a version of the elimination diet anyways, not an official test, but that's kind of what that is. Emily, I did the Vega test at the beginning of TSW and was sensitive to everything. Yeah, so I don't know I haven't talked to anyone. I don't personally do them. I think they're really cool, but I don't know what they would say about that. If it's like the same kind of vibe as the IgG test, like you're just inflamed massively and sensitive to everything, which I think would make sense because what the Vega test is doing is reflecting how your body's reacting to stuff, which it would be if your gut was leaky. So yeah, probably not a true picture. I had the prick testing last year and it took 6 hours for the welts to show up and get really big. Yeah, me too. Yeah, some of those reactions are like slow and insidious, and it's so uncomfortable because they're underneath the skin and like the welts. And if you have the eczema, the TSW itch, some of you might know this, it like histamine lives under the skin, and it just, yeah, it's just real unpleasant. So obviously, like if you're at home and that happens, you're going to kind of clue into yourself that you're allergic to that thing, and the doctor wouldn't know that, but just an example that it can not be obvious. Okay, so histamine is the culprit behind all of this. This is the thing, the molecule that makes all of this stuff go down, all of the inflammation, the redness, the swelling. Histamine is a molecule released in the immune system by a mast cell, something called a mast cell. So those are in charge of histamine. In our day-to-day, and for many of us, and today's talk, we're talking about histamine in the context of causing allergies and inflammation, but it's actually quite a complex molecule and it's involved in quite a few systems in the body. So yes, in the allergic response, but also in the nervous system. So in the nervous system, histamine is a neurotransmitter that keeps us awake. It's involved in wakefulness. And so if we have a lot of histamine overload, if we're in an allergic flare, we might notice things like anxiety or a lot of like insomnia, we can't sleep, just agitation, mania, if you tend towards that. And then also on that side, it also is involved in the cardiovascular system. So it'll affect our heart rate or cause arrhythmias and increased heart rate, norepinephrine, all of that kind of stuff. Also, histamine is involved in the gut. So another thing that is involved in specifically is increasing stomach acid is like a little byproduct. So you might notice things like cramping or heartburn or nausea or stuff like that if you're in a flare or if it's allergy season. These are all things that aren't really talked about as symptoms or signs of allergies, but they can be. So I won't go into this too much. This is a bit of a science lesson here, but I just wanted to touch on like there are 4 types of histamine receptors that we know of now, and they all are involved in and they all show up kind of in different systems like this. So the H1 and the H2 receptors are the ones that modern pharmacology has kind of targeted because they're the ones that are most known. They're in the like in the immune system, the allergy system, that kind of stuff. H2 receptors are found in the gut. So Zantac, the drug Zantac, it's a heartburn medication. That's actually an antihistamine in the gut. It's an H2 receptor. Zantac is the American name, so I don't know the other ones, sorry, but that's what it is. And so if you have an allergic reaction and you go to the hospital, they're going to give you the Zantac too. And they're also going to give you H1 blockers, which are more of your traditional like antihistamine allergy medications. So the H3 and the H4 receptors they're not really used in drugs and medications. I have a little chart here. Do you really want to get into it? But they're not really used because there is such a thing as having too little histamine. Okay, so a lot of us, we talk about like antihistamines. We don't want histamines. Histamine is bad. It does play a really important role in our body, right? We need to be awake. We need to have energy. We need to, inflammation is important. We need it to respond to our environment. We need to have stomach acid. So like it can be dangerous to cut too much histamine, which is why they don't really mess around with the H3, the H4, because that's like the feedback loop. And so when we take antihistamines, most of them are dealing with the H1 and the H2 receptors. So yes, it might help with the allergy symptoms, but it might not. Right. So each person is like activating different receptors. It has a different concentration of receptors in different parts of their body, depending on what's going on. So like, for example, if you have a ton of H3 receptors, if you're a person and it's feeding back into the system and you're just taking a bunch of over-the-counter antihistamines and they're not doing anything because they're blocking the H1 receptors, and that's not your problem, that's a clue to me. Like if we're going through, that's a clue to me. Okay, we need to kind of work on these other systems. And then we might also notice that you have more like anxiety, you have more of this kind of stuff. So it is like more complex and quite a puzzle when you get down to it. And obviously not everyone's going to have this issue. I guess I'm talking here more to the eczema and TSW people because I know histamine is more of an issue for y'all. But in general, most people can get away with just taking an over-the-counter allergy pill, an H1 blocker, because that's the problem in general. But also an interesting kind of thing just to note is taking a ton of antihistamines doesn't actually solve the problem, because what you're doing is the antihistamines they're not stopping the histamine from being produced, and it's not helping the histamine break down. It's just blocking the receptor. So all of that histamine is still hanging out in the body. It's still there. And if you think about it, what we've done now is we've blocked the H1 type of receptor. We now all have this extra histamine. All this extra histamine is now going to go to the other receptors, which we haven't blocked, and activate those potentially. So, I mean, if you're following, again, you don't maybe need to know this is a bit of a science thing, but if you're a nerd like me and you kind of want to understand what's going on in your body when you take these antihistamines, it's not necessarily solving the problem. It's not solving the problem at all. It's just blocking the effect. So you can't see. It's like, well, I can't see you, histamine. You're not there. You are still there. So now going into the causes of imbalance, like I was just saying, we want to ask further questions. Why do you have all this histamine? Why is this happening? Where is it coming from? Is it because you're overproducing histamine? Is your body, like, does it have too much? Whether this be genetic, whether this be because your environment is causing it to overproduce stuff. Like too much is being produced. Is it because you're taking too much in the diet? So this is also a thing. If you're really sensitive, you're eating a lot of fermented food. We're going to talk in depth about the histamine diet and food tomorrow, so don't worry about that. But that's another cause or a reason that can happen. Again, issues with enzyme pathways that break down histamine. So you could be producing too much, you could be taking too much in, you could not be breaking it down. You might just have an imbalance of those receptor types we were talking about, leaky gut and imbalance of the microbiome. So we didn't talk yet about this, but we will tomorrow. The microbiome in the gut is a huge contributor to histamine. So if we're not breaking down our food, if we think about it, we're eating a bunch of food that's just sitting there in our gut. If we don't have the right things to digest it, it's just going to sit there. It's going to sit there, it's going to sit there, it's going to ferment, and that's what causes histamine. So it's kind of gross, but if we're not breaking our food down, it's just sitting down in our gut, fermenting. And then environmental allergens and exposures again. So we will talk about toxicity. Detox next month and the month after, we're talking exclusively about detox, environmental, preparing the body for detox. How do we do it safely? So we're going to go into a deep dive on that, but it is important when considering allergies because we want to have a clean slate. Okay, so some of the most common root causes of allergies, atopic disease, whether that be eczema, allergies, asthma. Again, this is more of a genetic thing. We start to nowadays learn something called the hygiene hypothesis, which is the idea that the rates of allergies and asthma and atopic stuff is increasing in the world because of our focus on cleanliness. So that's when it's saying basically our immune system is developed in tandem with our environment, with the gut, with the microbiome, with eating the dirt, with going outside and playing in plants. This is how our immune system develops. And so nowadays, in our world, we're spraying the playgrounds with antiseptics, antibiotics. I don't even know what they're spraying it with now. So we have this hyper clean immune system, and our body isn't learning how to react appropriately to things, what's safe, what's not. And so this is why we get more of an incidence of the atopic allergic diseases. Also common things to look for: gut inflammation, so food sensitivities over time, parasites, and viruses. So this is something I haven't touched on yet, but it's something I ask and investigate in every single one of my patients and clients, and also yeast and candida and fungus. So just like funky things growing in the body. Again, a lot of us have it, whether we're in TSW or not. But these things they can trigger immune reactions, they can trigger all sorts of crazy things to happen in the body. So we definitely want to do a deep dive. And so asking yourself, well, actually, I'll go into those questions later, but we do 100% want to be conscious of other funky things that could be causing this. And then environments, we're going to talk about that in deep depth here. So environmental triggers, like I was saying, obviously spraying is the biggest one and most common one that causes allergies for people. And this is because of the abundance of pollen, because it's the season of growth and birth and pollen. So that's just around. But you also want to pay attention to other seasons that you might be triggered, because it's not just spring that people get allergies, and it can give us a clue as to what we're reacting to again. So testing can help us as well, but paying attention to our bodies and paying attention to the seasons can be also the most helpful. So spring, if you react a lot to things in spring, probably pollen is a culprit. Realizing I did these seasons out of order, but that's okay. If you react a lot in fall or in the summer, sorry, if you react a lot to things in the summer, um, grass, grass could be an issue. Ugh, excuse me. And then if you react in the summer also heat and humidity, that can be a big trigger for people as well, especially if skin is an issue, if skin is your problem. Moving into fall, ragweed. Ragweed is really high in fall. And this is also when mold season starts to come. And then moving into winter. Ugh, sorry, excuse me, guys. I'm going to mute myself for a second. Okay, I'm good. Got like dust in my throat. So mold is a big one in the winter. So if you live somewhere, like I used to live in the Pacific Northwest, cold and damp, mold is when it's in, like, even in the UK and Europe, it's cold and damp, a lot of old homes. This is when you want to be really aware of mold. So this is in your home and your work. And then obviously there's a little bit you can do with mold. You want to make sure everything is as clean as you can. Get your air filters cleaned, get your ducts cleaned. But then some of it, you're at the mercy of the environment and where you live. So there are ways to desensitize yourself to mold. There's something called SLIT, sublingual immunotherapy. It's not available everywhere. It's kind of still elusive. It's like the alternative to allergy shots. So I'll talk about that more tomorrow. But at the end of the day, mold and environment is kind of an obstacle to cure. It depends on your body and what's going on, and like if it's worth it. Essentially, like mold wreaks havoc on the body on so many levels just beyond the allergic system. So if you're living somewhere that there's a lot of mold around, it's like a high priority to get out if you can, that building. But within, also just realizing life is life. So I'll leave it at that. So some of the most common triggers, like we were talking about, the most common food triggers, milk, eggs, fish, shellfish, tree nuts, peanuts, wheat, and soybeans. So these are the things, if we do like a traditional elimination diet, these are the things that we would remove mostly. There are, other things that are common that trigger people often. Nuts trigger people often, grains trigger people often, like citrus foods sometimes. And here I'm talking about specifically things that often cause allergies or sensitivity. Sorry, I'm not talking about high histamine foods, because I know that we could go down so many roads with diet. We will talk about that tomorrow, but I'm just talking here specifically about finding things that are triggering your immune system from more of a root cause. So what are you actually allergic to? So all of you potentially will have a little bit of a sense of what you're allergic to or not, but these are the foods that are most commonly triggering people. These pollens, molds, again, we talked about chemicals, and pets. Okay, chemicals, this is what I was remembering I didn't want to forget talking about when I was talking about testing. I didn't talk about patch testing and chemical testing. So these are also abound in the environment and could be triggering a whole bunch of stuff to happen. So in the Western world, what they'll do is more of like a patch test, to like put it on the skin and see if you're actually reacting. That can be obviously really helpful for contact dermatitis. In the naturopathic functional world, there are other tests we can use to sort of see what's going on in terms of like chemical, how your body's breaking down chemicals or detoxing stuff. Some tests might be like an organic acids test is one that I use often. So if someone is like super sensitive to a lot of things and potentially chemicals, we would do that to see what their body is breaking down. what they're sensitive to and what metabolites are showing up. Often these are urine tests or stool tests or sweat tests or saliva tests because it's breaking down metabolites or checking metabolite breakdowns. You can't actually often measure direct toxic levels. Um, Heavy metal testing, obviously another one that we can do. That's a urine test, doing the same thing as testing the breakdowns of the metals in the urines. What's the other one I was just gonna say? Like mold testing, you could do heavy metal oats. I forget, but yeah. So those are the ones that we would use. There's also like the hair heavy metal testing. Hormone testing can help us figure out if you're thinking that you have like a hormone disruptor. Okay, last thing I want to touch on today is oral allergy syndrome. This is kind of more of a fun and interesting one and quite common, and one of those things that it's like, oh, that's like so common, but maybe people don't talk about it often. And I just wrote this slide and I'm realizing that like last month they changed the name of oral allergy syndrome to like pollen, it's something to do with pollen, something or other. So this is outdated. This is not factual. There's a new and fancy name for this, but formerly known as oral allergy syndrome. What it is if you ever notice that you eat a food, so common culprits are like cantaloupes, kiwis, avocados, raw carrots are common, apples sometimes are common. But yeah, you can see the list down here. There's a few random things, but what happens is you get that like itchy, fuzzy mouth feeling, your throat gets itchy, like it's kind of like a mini allergic reaction. And what that's all about is it's called formerly called oral allergy syndrome, and it's a cross reaction between the environment and your food. So this is like a hybrid sort of reaction. It's not a food sensitivity, it's not an IgG reaction. It's an IgE reaction, but it's not a complete allergy. It's just a little bit of a cross reaction in the mouth. So if you can look at this chart, and all of this stuff, I should say, I've just created the course online, so it'll be the same format as the other stuff. I'm just gonna cut this video up and I'll add it to the sections, but you'll have access to all of this stuff on the course. So this chart will be on there on the platform. But you can see some of the stuff that is cross-reacting. So for example, if you have issues with cantaloupe, like raw cantaloupe, that's a common one. My husband cannot eat cantaloupe because he gets this so bad. Then you're likely environmentally allergic to ragweed and grass. And so it's just kind of like, oh, okay, so I can't eat cantaloupe, it triggers me. I get flares of allergies and whatever in the fall, because that's when ragweed is high, and summer, so around that time. Okay, so like starting to realize that, okay, this is going to be a tough time for me. I'm starting to get triggered by these foods, by these things. Fall is when my immune system is whatever. So this means that before fall, a few months, you really want to start beefing up your immune system. You want to start the antioxidants. You want to start all the protocol that we'll talk about tomorrow. You want to start really focusing on stress and taking care of yourself and making sure you're detoxing. And this is again, just about learning those clues. And vice versa here, if you know that you're severely allergic to like trees and pollens, then maybe avoiding or not eating some of these foods that are potentially going to cause that reaction. So even though, you ask yourself, even though it's not that serious of a reaction, are you willing to do it? Maybe yes, maybe no. What's causing inflammation in your body. So this is learning again how sensitive you are as a person and what you're willing to risk, I guess. Okay, so these are again some of the questions we've already gone through, mostly all of this stuff, but how to actually uncover your triggers individually. Again, this is going to be a module in the course portal, so you can see all of this. And I really encourage you, if you are an allergic person, if you do suffer with allergies or eczema, or if you have any clients or friends or family members that do, these are some questions you can ask yourself or ask them to help them uncover their triggers. So asking yourself again about the genetics and your family history. Do you have any family members that also have issues like this? Does it run in your DNA? Have you ever had a DNA test done? If you have, there are certain triggers, and I'm sure you maybe run it through a report, but there's certain genes, certain things that's even on a deeper level that can trigger atopic disease. So looking into that. Childhood history. So again, looking at that hygiene hypothesis theory, were you born via C-section or were you born vaginally? Vaginally born babies get the exposure again to the mom's microbiome, whereas C-section babies don't. So, and also breastfeeding, again, you're getting your immunoglobulins directly from your mom, whereas formula feeding, you're not getting those biologics from your mom. This isn't a rule set in stone. Also, I was vaginally born and I was breastfed, and I still ended up an atopic allergic child. So, it's sometimes just how it goes. But these are clues and things that can lead to it. So if you grew up in like a hypersanitary environment, lots of cleaning chemicals, maybe you didn't spend a lot of time outside in the dirt in nature, these are all things that can impact your immune system development. Other things to ask, vaccines. So I'm not going to get into that too much here, but these can trigger the immune system. That is literally what they're doing. They are designed to activate the immune system when we are children. Especially nowadays, we're really over inundating these kids with a lot of triggers right off the bat. So depending on what you went through and what's going on for you, what was going on, that can also be a question to ask. If you were prone to a lot of infections as a child, asking, first of all, yes, why was that happening? But also what happened because of that? Did you take a lot of antibiotics? A lot of medications? Did you have things like mono? Epstein-Barr virus can cause a lot of things. Oh, what is the next one? So have you traveled anywhere exotic? So parasites, we talked about that. But yeah, Epstein-Barr, mono, things like that. Always want to be asking questions if there's any weird stuff that happened in the past that could trigger the immune system. Food sensitivities and gut stuff. So paying really close attention to foods that are triggering you. And then environmental and detox. So all of those triggers. So you can start to see now there are a lot of things that can be triggering you, a lot of things to look for, a lot of things to uncover, and it is really important at the end of the day if you really want to get to an approach where you're not just popping antihistamines and blocking random receptors. You really want to balance your body. Again, looking at these indigenous cultures and these traditional forms of medicine, they focus more on what we're going to talk about tomorrow, root cause stuff. Yes, using like supplements and diets and nervous system work to really target that, but also understanding what we need to target and where we need to place our efforts. So my whole MO, as many of you know, is it's not easy medicine. It's not just like popping a pill. I'm really encouraging you. And if you're here, you're showing up, you're curious about your health, but I want us all to really be sovereign and to really understand our bodies and our health and what we're taking and what we're doing. So we don't need to be dependent on a system that doesn't really understand us in general. So blending a lot of these old forms of knowing just because they have the history, but also our intuition and just our day-to-day, how we're moving through our modern worlds will be key. Okay, so that's all I got for you today. I went super over. I really hope that you enjoyed it and learned some things, and I didn't talk too much about stuff you don't care about. Yes, tomorrow we're going to be talking about what we're actually going to do next and how we can do it. If anyone has any questions, go ahead and pop them in the chat or just unmute yourself so I can see. Oops, how do I? Okay, shared. And if not, feel free to just pop off. I'll hang out here if anyone wants to chat. But otherwise, I will see you tomorrow, same time, same place for part 2.
Thanks, Kayla. That was great.
Thanks for coming. Have a good one.